stage in making sure citizens will have access to the coronavirus vaccine when it reaches our shores. Addressing the nation last night, the president said the country is expected to receive the first batch of vaccines early next year, which will cover about 10% of the population. He says efforts at finding a COVID-19 vaccine are being carefully considered by the African Union. Now, to discuss this further, we're joined via Skype by Professor Jeffrey Mphahlele. He's the Vice President of Research at the South African Medical Research Council. Professor Mphahlele also serves on the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Vaccines. A very good morning and thanks for making the time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me, and good day to your viewers.
All right, President Cyril Ramaphosa last night announced that only 10%. How will we as a country will have access to the vaccine? How will it be decided who gets it first?
Yeah, very interesting question. So all the countries are actually in that predicament because they have to prioritize who should get the vaccine, because currently we have got limited supply, and you might have seen the countries that have already introduced the vaccine through emergency use, that is not mass rollout to everybody. However, they are targeting those who are at high risk for exposure to COVID-19. So it will be most probably the case in South Africa. So there will be individuals or groups that are prioritized for vaccination in the first round of vaccines that will be received. And that's what determines the 10% of the population.
Yeah. So the old concern of an uneven society and the rich essentially getting access first won't apply in this case?
Is part of the reason we have a COVAX facility. Because if we don't have COVAX facility, it means that the rich countries will just have access to the vaccine, and poorer countries which cannot even afford the vaccines will be left out. So South Africa is in a, I would say, different situation, because even if we are not a rich country, however, we are expected to buy our own vaccines. And this is actually the case with the vaccines for the National Immunization Program, which is largely the childhood immunization program. So even in the COVID-19 vaccine is still the case. South Africa has to fork out money, has to budget for these vaccines, and that has been done for the 10% of the population. However, as I said, this is just the first round of the vaccination. Going forward, as more vaccines become available, there will be a means to ensure that all citizens receive the vaccines.
So the UK has reportedly warned against the Pfizer vaccine for people with a history of significant allergic reactions. Should we be concerned about that?
We should be on the lookout for any rare side events, so side effects of the vaccines, because of the limited time of testing. The COVID-19 vaccine. You will remember that traditionally it takes many years, at least 10 to 15 years, to develop vaccines. However, in this case, it has taken less than 12 months to develop the COVID-19 vaccine, which means that they've compressed the different phases of testing. And usually at phase 3 clinical testing, you follow up participants for a couple of years to ensure that you collect all the safety data, which is not the case for COVID-19 vaccines. So this means that as we roll out the vaccines in the public, we should continue what we call pharmacovigilance studies, collecting rare side events or effects of the vaccines, and any other form of effects of the vaccines. So we should be on the lookout for that.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying it's not going to be there's not going to be a sense of immediacy in this process. It's a long-term outlook.
What I'm saying is that even if the vaccines are being used, the citizens should be aware that they are being used using preliminary safety and efficacy data. And this is part of the reason that most countries that have introduced the vaccines are using them they're using the vaccines as part of emergency, use. So it's unlike a traditional way where, the vaccine is licensed by a regulator before it's rolled out. So emergency use simply means that the vaccine has been tested enough to be given to the public, but we should continue to collect safety data. That's what it means.
Talk to us about some of the foreseeable distribution challenges when the vaccine distribution starts.
Well, there will be a number of logistical challenges because COVID-19 is not a typical vaccine that will fit perfectly into the current immunization program. In South Africa, the vaccines are delivered through the childhood immunization programs at clinics and health facilities. But for COVID-19, obviously, the distribution could be beyond just clinics, and that needs to be worked out. So there could be, pharmacists who are interested to vaccinate. There could be GPs that are interested to vaccinate, or we can even find, other ways, some other ways of innovations to distribute the vaccines. So we need to work out the mechanisms of how best we can distribute the vaccines. But the current infrastructure is going to be the health facilities, and maybe there will be other vaccination points that will be added to the health facilities to help distribute the vaccines.
What would be the impact of vaccine nationalism on a global plan to distribute COVID-19, the vaccine?
Well, we have seen that the nationalism, when it comes to the vaccines, has created tensions, geopolitical tensions. And fortunately, we have got COVAX facility, which means that countries can still access COVID-19 vaccine, but other countries will still have to go the route of bilateral negotiations with the manufacturers themselves.
South African Health Products Regulatory Authority says it has received its first application to register a COVID-19 vaccine from Johnson & Johnson. Talk to us about the vaccine licensing process.
So the licensing process is something that is done by the regulatory authority. Typically, the manufacturer will supply the data to the regulatory authority, and that data contains all the information that is needed by the regulatory authority to assess if the vaccine has been tested rigorously and following standard procedures, preclinical testing and clinical testing. And the safety and efficacy of the vaccines have been properly evaluated. And if there are any serious side adverse events, they've been reported, and the efficacy of the vaccine is clearly articulated, and only then, the regulatory authority will give a license to the manufacturer to distribute the vaccine. So typically that is the process of licensing a vaccine.
I know you're a scientist, but I would like to ask you a question about South African society and politics and influential people in our community. Last week we had the Chief Justice Mogoeng weigh in on the conversations about a vaccine and warning people about not just agreeing to take whatever vaccine is presented to them. What's the conversation in the science space about such pronouncements by influential people?
Well, this is actually raising an interesting debate, because it simply means that we need to educate the society about the importance of vaccines. We know that there are so-called anti-vaxxers, and we know that there is vaccine hesitancy, and there is just lack of confidence in vaccines in some quarters. However, for COVID-19 vaccines, there might be some genuine concerns, like we talked about the safety issues, that this is the first time that a vaccine has taken such a short time to be produced. So there could be others who are still concerned about the safety of the vaccine, and that is okay. But I think the scientists and those who are in the vaccination field should continue to educate the society that even if COVID-19 vaccine has been developed within a short space of time, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to kill anyone if you take the vaccine. The reason for this is because it's been tested in a huge number of participants globally, different countries, and the safety data has been collected and has been submitted to regulatory authorities. And even those who are taking the vaccine, they will continue to report any side effect, if any, to the health facilities or even to the regulatory authority. So it doesn't mean that because we don't have all the information about the vaccine when it comes to long-term safety, then the vaccine is dangerous to the society. But that requires education and requires experts in the field of communication to really pass that kind of a message.
Yeah, you serve on two platforms that are really engaging the president in terms of responses to COVID-19. One of them is the South African Medical Research Council, and then you're also on the Ministerial Advisory Committee on vaccines. There were a lot of questions yesterday following the president's address about how he's engaging in terms of the national question and also how he's engaging separately with provinces. Just give us a sense of how these interactions, how these engagements are conducted.
Unfortunately, I'm not in that space. I think is the space for probably the National Department of Health. The advisory body, its role is just to advise the Minister of Health, and in this case, in terms of the kind of vaccines that are most likely to be suitable for our country. And obviously, the role of the South African Medical Research Council is to fund and conduct research. However, I can say that it appears to me that when the president is making the pronouncements that he has made, clearly there is a consultation process with different stakeholders, the provinces, the health fraternity, the science fraternity, and even the advisory bodies. So there is definitely an interaction between the president and the different stakeholders. Unfortunately, I'm not involved in all, the interactions that the president is doing.
Well, let's thank you for talking to us today. Professor Jeffrey Mphahlele, he's the Vice President of Research at the South African Medical Research Council and also serves on the Ministerial Advisory Committee on vaccines. Thanks once again.
You're welcome.
Let's take